This isn't the Wild West you saw in movies. This is the version they didn't want you to know. The first thing you notice is the dust, coarse, sharp, and relentless, like sandpaper grinding your skin raw with every gust of prairie wind. The second thing is the silence right after the gunshot. You don't hear the crack echoing off the buildings in Sweetwater anymore. What you hear now is your own heartbeat thudding in your ears as you lower your smoking pulp and watch the man across from you crumple like a marionette with its strings cut.
I believe this hand is mine.
You're 23 years old, and you just killed a man. That was the moment Masterson was born. Before that, you were William Barkley, just another buffalo hunter. Another tough kid with a stubborn streak and a steady aim. But this wasn't just any shootout. You defended your brother's honor, challenged a seasoned soldier, and walked away alive while Sergeant Melvin King didn't. The bullet passed through your pelvis that day. And for the rest of your life, you'd carry a limp as a reminder. But the limp became part of the legend. And soon the name, Bat, a nickname from your days carrying a bat as a weapon, spread faster than the gunpowder smoke had cleared that morning. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your boots crunch down Sweetwater's Main Street as people peek from behind doors and window blinds. The tension is a tangible thing, clinging to you like your own shadow. You try not to limp. Try to stand tall, but your hip is screaming and your pride is already rehearsing the tale it'll tell tomorrow. That's the thing no one mentions about shootouts. The pain is never as cinematic as they make it seem. There's no dramatic background music, just an odd numbness followed by fire in your nerves. Later, when the blood's cleaned and the whiskey burns down your throat, you'll get the shakes. You'll question what you did. Then you'll hear someone retelling it from across the room, and they'll say you never blinked. They'll say you were born for this. Historians still argue whether you acted in cold self-defense or reckless pride. But it doesn't really matter anymore. What matters is that now you're a man with a reputation, and reputations are like poker hands. They're built on luck, bluff, and the ability to keep a straight face. Sweetwater isn't Dodge City, but it whispers just as loudly. You're already planning your next move before the undertaker finishes measuring the body. You've heard about a place where men can reinvent themselves overnight, where cattle drives, saloons, and loose laws make for fast fortunes. So you pack your things, grit your teeth through the pain, and set your sights on Kansas. You're not running, not exactly. You're just chasing a new version of yourself. The train rattles through miles of nothing, and every bump reminds you of the hole in your side. But you're alive. More than alive, you're becoming someone. You practice your story with the same care you once reserved for cleaning your rifle. By the time you limp off that platform in Dodge, you're no longer a buffalo hunter. You're a gunslinger, a man who's stared death down and smirked. The town greets you with the smell of manure and gun oil. The streets are muddy, the air thick with sweat and smoke, and there's always someone yelling about cheating at cards. You fit right in. Over the next few weeks, you make your name the old-fashioned way, through courage, charm, and a pinch of violence. You outshoot a drunk cowboy in a bar brawl. You save a saloon girl from a knife-wielding gambler. And you do it all with that limp, that trademark tilted hat, and a smirk that tells folks you know something they don't. People start calling you a legend, but legends are dangerous things. They're flattering masks that demand you live up to them, even when you're bone-tired or 3 drinks too deep. And here's the quirky tidbit no one likes to admit. One of your favorite pastimes isn't dueling or womanizing. It's reading dime novels about yourself. Sometimes you chuckle at how far the stories stretch. Sometimes, you copy a line or two into your own memory, just in case someone asks about your past and you need a good quote. You've started to realize something strange. The more people believe in Masterson, the less they seem to notice William. And you're starting to forget him too. So you lean in. You sharpen your words like you once sharpened your knives. You dress a little sharper. You walk a little slower. Letting the limp dramatize your every step. You become your own performance. And the West eats it up like molasses on flapjacks. Still, you never forget Sweetwater. Sometimes at night, when the saloons quiet down and the wind howls just right, you hear that gunshot again. The first one. The one that tore through King and through your old life. Funny thing is, you never really liked violence. You just got good at surviving it. And now, there's no going back. You don't remember the first time you held a rifle, not exactly. But you remember the smell of gun oil. The weight of it in your young hands. And the way your father's voice dropped to a low, reverent tone whenever he talked about hunting. Not for sport, mind you, for survival. That's what the Mastersons knew best. How to survive in a world that didn't give out second chances. So you head west, not for gold or glory, but for buffalo. Thousands of them, maybe millions, stretching across the Great Plains like a breathing, snorting carpet of brown hide and muscle. You're barely 18, wearing boots that don't quite fit, eyes squinting under a ragged hat, and already carrying the weight of two brothers and a country still scarred from the Civil War. You learn quickly. One shot, one kill. Aim for the lungs if you want a clean death. Aim for the spine if you're angry. You kill hundreds, maybe thousands. Buffalo hunting isn't glamorous, it's bloody. Backbreaking work. You skin the carcasses, haul the hides, sleep beside mountains of bones, and wake to coyotes gnawing at what you missed. Here's the historical fact they always skip in the frontier bedtime stories. Buffalo hunting wasn't just an occupation, it was strategic. The government backed it quietly, knowing it would starve out native tribes by wiping out their primary food source. And you were part of that machine, even if you didn't fully grasp it at the time. But there's something else that sticks with you. The men, the hardened, wild-eyed hunters who drank like fish and fought like wolves. You weren't like them, not yet, but you learned their ways. And you saw what happened when you stayed too long in that life. Hands that shook. Eyes that saw ghosts. And a deep, unspoken guilt that no whiskey could drown. There's a moment you'll never forget, standing knee-deep in snow. Staring at a buffalo calf whose mother you just shot. The calf doesn't run. It just stares at you. Big brown eyes wide and glassy. Breathing in slow panicked bursts. And for once, you lower your rifle. You let it live. You never tell anyone about that. Historians still argue whether you hunted for profit or because you liked the power. Truth is, you don't really know either. But you do know this. When the buffalo began to vanish, so did your purpose. So you wandered. Next stop, the Texas Panhandle, where buffalo hunters become bodyguards, and saloons become battlegrounds. You pick up work where you can, guarding freight wagons, escorting gamblers, breaking up brawls. The money's decent, but the real payoff is experience. You learn how to read a man's face before he draws, how to move your weight so a punch doesn't knock you flat, and how to make a threat sound like a compliment. You also learn that a quick wit is deadlier than a quick draw. That's when you meet a man named Comanche Jack Stillwell. He's part scout, part showman, and he takes a liking to your style. Together, you ride with Colonel Nelson Miles, chasing renegade Cheyenne across rough country in the middle of winter. You freeze, you starve, you bleed, but you survive. Always that. And when you come back to camp with snow in your beard and arrows in your coat, the men start calling you something different, not just bad. They call you, that tough kid, that crazy little cuss, and once, just once, the one who doesn't miss. Of course, they're exaggerating. You've missed plenty, but by now, you've figured out that the Wild West isn't about truth, it's about storytelling. And you've got a growing collection of your own. At night, by the fire, someone passes around a bottle, and the conversation drifts to the future. One man dreams of owning a railroad. Another wants to run for mayor in some dust-blown town no one's ever heard of. You want something harder to define. Respect. Maybe. Or immortality. The kind that gets written down in books and remembered by schoolchildren who can't even pronounce your last name right. You gamble more now. Not just with cards, but with people. You bet that a man won't shoot. You bet that a sheriff won't check your saddlebag too closely. You bet that you can make it out of Texas without collecting another bullet. One night, you lose big, both money and pride. A card sharp from Missouri accuses you of cheating. And you don't even argue. You just stand, tip your hat, and knock him flat with one punch. You're not proud of it. But it feels better than explaining. The next morning, you're gone, back on a horse, back toward Kansas. There's a town there, a nasty little spit of chaos called Dodge City. You've heard stories. That's where you'll find your brothers again. That's where you'll put everything you've learned to the test. And that's where your name will either be etched in legend, or lost beneath the mud like so many others. But for now, you ride. The wind stings your face. The sun bakes your hat. And your thoughts drift somewhere between memory and myth. You don't know it yet. But you're only a few weeks away from your first badge. And your last truly peaceful sleep. Dodge City doesn't greet you with open arms. It doesn't greet anyone, really. It snarls. You arrive with your saddle sore, boots caked in buffalo dung, and a face that's half sunburn, half stubble. But you've got something Dodge respects more than a clean shave. You've got a story. And a limp. The place is chaos made manifest. Cattle barons shout orders. Trail hands stagger through town like they've just been spun off the edge of the world. And the smell, good Lord. The smell is part manure, part whiskey, part gunpowder. It sticks to your clothes like guilt. You don't flinch. You just walk down Front Street like you belong there. Even if your hips screaming and your stomach's empty. It's the first rule of Dodge. Never let them see the limp before the pistol. Your brothers are here, Ed and Jim. And seeing their faces again after all the blood and distance softens something in your chest. Just a little. Ed's working as a lawman already. Eyes sharp as ever. And he vouches for you when Marshal Larry Deeger starts asking questions about your past. You keep your answers vague. Deeger doesn't care. Dodge doesn't care. All it wants to know is whether you can handle a fight. You prove you can in less than 48 hours. It starts, like most things in Dodge, with a drunk and a bad idea. A cowboy pulls a revolver in a crowded saloon. He wants to impress a girl or scare a rival. No one's really sure, and you're the one who moves first. You disarm him. Fast. Too fast. People whisper afterward that you must have been born with a Colt in your hand. You're offered a job the next morning, deputy sheriff. Not much pay, but a lot of danger. Exactly your flavor. You take it, even though deep down, you know being a lawman in Dodge is like trying to clean a pig with a silk handkerchief. The town doesn't want order, it wants spectacle. And you're about to give it both. You start dressing sharper. A dark hat, clean boots, a cane to go with your limp. The cane's real, but the way you twirl it? That's just flair. You cultivate the image like a gambler stacks cards, carefully, methodically, and always with an eye toward the crowd. Historians still argue whether your fashion sense was born out of necessity or ego. But the result is the same. People notice. They remember. You become the most stylish man in a place where most men don't even tuck in their shirts. But Dodge is no fashion show. It's a war zone, and you're thrown into the thick of it. Break up bar fights. Disarm belligerent cowboys. Drag gamblers out by their boot heels. Sometimes you talk your way out. Sometimes you shoot your way out. The line between justice and revenge is blurred, smudged, and finally erased. And here's the quirky tidbit. You're probably one of the only sheriffs in Kansas who starts each day with a game of faro. Not for the money, necessarily. For the calm, the control, the momentary illusion that you can manipulate outcomes with the flick of a wrist. That calm is tested quickly. There's a night, rain-slicked streets, thunder rumbling like distant artillery, when a gang rides into town looking for trouble. They find you instead. The standoff is straight out of the kind of dime novel you secretly detest. 4 men. One you recognize as a bounty jumper from Texas. You don't draw first, but you draw best. 2 go down. The others run. The papers eat it up. So do the locals. From then on, folks speak your name with a kind of hushed awe. Bat Masterson. The lawman with a gambler's grin and a limp that doesn't slow him down. They talk about your shootouts. Your calm under fire. Your ability to settle a saloon in 10 seconds flat with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a Colt .45. And yet, for all your growing fame, you're still just surviving. Day by day, Dodge wears at you. The corruption. The endless string of hot tempers and cold bodies. Sometimes you wonder if the badge is armor or a target. You take to walking at night, listening to the wind rattle the saloon shutters, watching as the town shifts and breathes in its sleep. There's something alive about it, something feral. And you're its tamer, or maybe just its favorite toy. Then comes the first time someone challenges you by name, not out of drunkenness or desperation, but ego. He wants to kill Bat Masterson. The legend, not William, not the man. And it hits you. Your reputation has grown so large. It no longer fits you. It's a suit of armor and a noose at the same time. Still, you win. Barely. The bullet grazes your arm and takes a chunk of your sleeve. You keep the coat, bloodstain and all. You wear it often. It reminds you of the truth behind the myth, that even the best can bleed. And legends? They're only a heartbeat away from becoming ghosts. But you keep showing up. You keep limping into saloons and scowling into jail cells and writing your name in the dust kicked up by restless boots. Because this is Dodge City. And this is your baptism. You don't become a legend by being the fastest draw. You become one by knowing when not to draw. As sheriff of Ford County, you learn this lesson fast. Faster than your own reflexes. Which, to be fair, are already the stuff of local legend. But here's the secret most folks don't understand. You don't crave violence, you avoid it. At least, when you can, because every bullet you fire is one more chance to end up like the men you used to bury. So instead, you talk, you charm, you smile that sideways gambler's grin and lean just close enough to make them uncomfortable. Sometimes, you tap your cane against your boot heel. Rhythmic, calm, like a countdown. And it works. Most of the time. There's a saloon brawl that gets so loud it rattles the floorboards of the courthouse 2 buildings over. You wade into it like a man walking through a thunderstorm in silk shoes, annoyed, wet, and mostly unimpressed. 2 punches, 1 pistol whip, and a boot to someone's ribs later. It's over. No shots fired. No blood spilled. Just another night in Dodge. Your flair becomes part of your mythos. You've got the mustache, the crisp suit, and that ridiculous, but somehow intimidating, ivory-handled cane. People start to think you like being a sheriff. But you don't. Not really. You like the power. You like the game. And this is a game. Dodge is your chessboard. Every outlaw, every drunk, every 2-bit cattle thief is a piece. And you're not the king. You're the gambler who cheats at chess by changing the rules mid-match. Still, power has its price. And yours comes due when a man named Jack Wagner rides into town with a sneer and a mission. He's looking to settle an old score with your brother Ed. You try to stop it. You fail. It's mid-morning, and Ed's standing outside the jailhouse. Calm as ever. Wagner steps from the shadows and shoots him down in the dirt like a dog. You hear the shots before you hear the screams. Then, just wind, hollow and cold, the kind that strips you down to your bones. Ed doesn't die right away. He bleeds into your hands, mumbling something you'll never fully catch. Then he goes quiet, and just like that, the world stops spinning. Historians still argue whether you hunted Wagner out of revenge or justice. But honestly, what's the difference? You ride hard. Find Wagner hiding with a few men on the edge of the county line. The standoff is short and brutal. They shoot first. You shoot better. Wagner dies with your brother's name still hanging in the air. You bring the bodies back to Dodge like trophies. Though you don't feel proud. You don't feel anything. Just tired. So tired. The townsfolk call it heroic. They say you avenged Ed like a true lawman. Like a brother should. But you know the truth. There's a crack inside you now. One that no badge can cover. That's when the showmanship begins to shift. You start spinning the stories before others can. You make jokes at your own expense. You exaggerate a little more. Add flair to facts. Color to wounds. Because if you can turn it into theater, maybe it'll hurt less. Maybe it'll mean something. Here's the quirky tidbit. You once staged your own gunfight for a reporter just to make the paper's deadline. Fired into the dirt. Cursed dramatically. The other man never even drew. But the article said it was the most thrilling duel Dodge had ever seen. You kept the clipping. Some nights, you drink until the saloon walls blur. Other nights, you sit at your desk in silence, rereading telegrams from friends who left Dodge behind for cleaner towns and quieter lives. You could do the same. But you don't. Because something about Dodge still needs you. Or maybe, deep down, you need it. The town's changing though. The cattle drives are slowing. The outlaws are thinning. Even the bar fights are getting smaller. Less theatrical. You see the writing on the saloon wall. And for the first time, you think about legacy, not just yours. But what kind of West you're leaving behind. There's a kid in town who idolizes you. Always pestering with questions. Always mimicking your walk. One day, he asks, "How many men you killed, Mr. Masterson?" You pause. Then you lie. Not to protect him. To protect yourself. Because if you say the real number, you'll have to feel it. And that's a luxury you can't afford. Not with that many ghosts in your wake. The saloons of Dodge City never sleep. They mutter, moan, and bellow through the night like fever dreams. Sawdust floors soaked in whiskey. Piano keys pounded into submission. And voices that ride the air like bullets in the dark. And you're right at home in the middle of it. You've traded your badge for a deck of cards now. Well, mostly. The sheriff gig still clings to your name like cigar smoke. But you've stepped into a new role, the gambler with a lawman's past. That's a hard combination to bluff against. You take your place at the faro table in the Long Branch Saloon. A whiskey in one hand and a silver dollar dancing across the knuckles of the other. The regulars know not to challenge you. The newcomers, though, they can't help themselves. They see your cane, your grin, your tilted hat, and they think easy money. They don't see the half-inch scar along your temple or the twitch in your left hand when someone reaches under their coat too fast. And every so often, someone makes a mistake. Like the ranch hand from Colorado who accuses you of cheating after losing 5 straight hands. You let him vent. You even offer to return some of the winnings. But when he flips the table and grabs his gun, you don't hesitate. One shot. Center mass. He folds like a bad hand. And the room freezes. You let the silence stretch. Then say, "Told you it was a bad bet." A few people laugh. Most don't. But your legend grows anyway. Historians still argue whether you really cheated at cards or just knew how to read people better than they read the deck. Doesn't matter now. Either way, you won more often than not. And when you lost, you made it look intentional. Here's a quirky little truth. You once won a gold pocket watch off a man who tried to rob the table. Instead of shooting him, you offered a double or nothing round. He agreed. You won. He left without his dignity or his boots. You wore that watch for years. Even after it stopped ticking. There's something oddly elegant about gambling. The ritual of it. The soft flick of cards. The clink of coins. It's not that different from a duel. Really, both hinge on knowing when to bluff, when to call, and when to go for blood. But it's not just cards anymore. You start running small games. Then hold tables. Before long, you're part owner in a few saloons across Kansas and Colorado. You keep your cut quiet, of course. Nothing draws suspicion faster than a lawman profiting from vice. Which brings us to the real contradiction of your life. You uphold the law by day. Then bend it by night. And the town lets you. Because when you walk into a room, the air changes. People stop mid-sentence. Drinks pause halfway to lips. No one wants to find out whether the stories are true. And yet, you're not unkind. You tip generously. You help widows cash out their husbands' final hands. You bail out the occasional drunk. Lecture him with a sigh. And send him back to work. You know what it's like to scrape bottom. You remember that kid with buffalo guts on his boots and too many regrets for someone so young. But make no mistake, you don't forgive disrespect. The cowboy who tried to short the house. You made him polish your boots for a week. The gambler who marked cards with lemon juice. You outed him mid-hand. Then offered him a second chance, at another table. In another town. You're not cruel. You're just fair. By your own rules. The money flows. Not in rivers, but steady streams. Enough for tailored coats, fine cigars, and nights in hotel suites instead of jail cells. You start sending small gifts to your mother. A brooch here. A fine pair of gloves there. She writes back once. Says she heard from a neighbor that her Billy made the papers again. She never calls you Bat. There's another name people start using now. Gentleman gunfighter. It sticks. You kind of like it. You attend local galas, donate to church fundraisers, and even sit on a committee for a new schoolhouse. Dodge is changing. And for once, you're not chasing the chaos, you're managing it. Still, you know the tide can turn fast. You've seen men go from kings to corpses overnight. So you keep your guns close. Your friends closer. And your enemies within hearing distance. Just in case. One night, a kid no older than 20 tries to rob the Long Branch. He's nervous, sloppy, voice cracking like a dropped bottle. You disarm him before he gets 2 words out. Instead of calling the deputies, you sit him down, order him a sarsaparilla, and ask where he learned to hold a pistol like that. He says, "From watching you, sir." You don't know whether to laugh or be horrified. So you just nod, finish your drink, and call it a night. Because being Bat Masterson comes with responsibilities now. And one of them is keeping your myth alive. You never liked working with Wyatt Earp. Too serious, too tall, too quick to pull rank over reason. But when you're both sitting across the same poker table, sipping rot-gut whiskey and scanning a room full of wanted men, you don't complain much. You met him years ago in Wichita. Back when you were still rough around the edges and he still wore a badge like it meant something eternal. He didn't laugh much, still doesn't, but he respects you. That counts for more than a smile out here. And now, in Dodge, your paths cross again. He's deputy marshal, you're sheriff, and together, you keep the peace, if you can call it that, in a town that chews up heroes and spits out broken men in 3-day stubble. The two of you develop a rhythm. You take the loud ones. He takes the fast ones. You share whiskey, grudges, and a mutual understanding that law and order in Kansas is mostly theater. You're just trying to make it a decent show. There's a night when Wyatt kicks down a saloon door looking for a murderer. You stand at his shoulder, cane tapping like a metronome. The killer's inside, cornered, drunk, and waving a shotgun like it's a dance partner. Wyatt says 3 words, Bat. Distract him. You sigh, take a step forward, and say, "Sir, I'll double your bar tab if you set that thing down nicely." The man laughs. Then Wyatt hits him with the butt of his pistol. Teamwork. Historians still argue whether you and Wyatt were truly friends or just begrudging allies. But that night, over a cheap bottle of Kentucky bourbon, he calls you, "The only man in this town I'd trust with my back turned." You never forget that. There's a moment, short, strange, maybe even sacred, when the two of you are sitting on the jailhouse steps just before dawn. Boots dusty, guns holstered, watching the sky bleed from black to bruised blue. Wyatt mutters, "You ever think about getting out?" You shake your head. And do what? Become respectable? He doesn't laugh, but he doesn't argue either. Soon, Dodge starts shifting again. The cattle drives slow. The cowboys move on. And new laws start to make the place less fun and more functional. Fewer brawls. Fewer bodies. More paperwork. You start to feel like a museum piece. A living ghost in a town that's forgotten how to haunt. And that's when the Short brothers show up. Jim Short, Ed Short, and Bat Short. Yes, that's really his name. 3 brothers. No relation to you. And yet every time someone yells, "Bat," in the street, your blood runs cold for a second. They're gunmen, gamblers, and trouble rolled into one neat package. They swagger into Dodge like they own it. You and Wyatt agree, you need to make an example. So you stage it. One night, the Shorts try to rig a game in the Long Branch. You spot the trick first. Marked cards. The oldest sin in the saloon Bible. Wyatt draws his gun. You draw your voice. And suddenly there's a crowd. You slap the cards onto the table. Gentlemen, if you're going to cheat, at least be creative. It gets a laugh. Then it gets real. Bat Short reaches for his gun. You shoot first. He collapses onto the table. His brothers scream. Wyatt handles them, efficiently. Surgically. The whole thing is over in less than 20 seconds. The town writes songs about it. Or at least, really dramatic editorials. You become the talk of Kansas again. For the 6th time, maybe 7th. It's hard to keep track. Here's a quirky footnote. 2 weeks later, someone mails you a silver money clip engraved with, "For Excellence in Frontier Justice." No note, no return address. You carry it for years. After that, Wyatt leaves, heads to Tombstone. He offers to take you with him. You decline. Dodge still feels like yours, even if it's shrinking around you. But you feel the absence immediately. Without Wyatt, it's just you and a town that's turning into a bureaucracy with wooden sidewalks. Less grit, more rules. You start sleeping in later, drinking more, gambling harder. You win a revolver with pearl inlays in a poker game against a dentist. You lose it a week later to a preacher. Balance. You've got your cane, your charm, your name, but something's off, like the music in your favorite saloon's just a beat too slow. You can't explain it, so you don't. Instead, you keep walking the boardwalk, watching the town grow up around you like a kid who stopped needing bedtime stories. One evening, a stranger tips his hat to you and says, "You're the guy from the papers, right, Bat Masterson?" You nod. He says, "I thought you'd be taller." You smile and reply, "I thought you'd be smarter." The legend holds, for now. But in the back of your mind, you know it's time to move on. Before Dodge becomes just another place where people ask, "Weren't you someone once?" It begins with a wire. Not the kind that holds fences together, but the kind that hums with telegraph pulses. Whispering across the country like gossip in a saloon. It's 1881, and you're in Tombstone now. Halfway between a new start and an old legend. The place feels like Dodge with better sunlight, dry, gold-flecked, and sharp around the edges. You didn't want to come. Not at first, but when Wyatt sent word, you packed fast. Because no matter how far apart you drift, when someone like Wyatt Earp calls for you, you answer. The wire reads simply, "Need you. Trouble brewing. W." And he's not exaggerating. You arrive to find the air thick with tension. The Clantons, the McClowrys, cowboys, rustlers, and gunslingers, all coiled like snakes waiting for one wrong glance. And in the middle of it all, Wyatt, Morgan, Virgil, and Doc Holliday, looking like a collection of saints who've misplaced their halos and found pistols instead. You don't wear a badge this time. You're not here to arrest anyone. You're here as a friend, a backup, an unspoken threat in polished boots and a pearl-handled cane. Then comes the OK Corral. You're not in the shootout. Not exactly. You arrive minutes after, breath fogging in the desert chill. Hands already resting near your revolvers. The air smells like sulfur and regret. 3 men dead, Virgil wounded, Morgan rattled, Doc smirking like a man who just cheated death again. Historians still argue whether you were involved behind the scenes, if you supplied ammo, planned the strategy, or stood as silent reinforcement. Some claim you never fired a shot. Others say you watched from the edge with one finger resting on the trigger, waiting for a name to be called. You don't correct them. Let the stories bloom. But the aftermath is messy. Tombstone doesn't become safer, it becomes meaner. Blood on the boardwalk. Revenge in the shadows. You see it in Wyatt's eyes. He's tired. Not weak. Never that. But weary in a way you understand too well. Then comes the letter. From a newspaperman in Denver. Wants to know if you'd write a column. Stories from the old days. Frontier reflections. He calls them. You laugh out loud when you read it. You? A writer? But the idea sticks. Meanwhile, someone insults you in a Kansas paper. A snide remark. Casual and cruel. Questioning your courage in Dodge all those years ago. They claim you exaggerated your exploits. That you never shot straight. That maybe you're more suit than substance. You send a reply, through the telegraph. Would be happy to discuss in person. Shall I visit or will you come to me? You mean it. The man declines. And that's the thing. Even years later, even as the West shifts beneath your boots and the wildness recedes, your name still carries weight. Not because of your gun, but because people never quite know what you're capable of. You write again, not to shoot, but to settle old bets. You visit saloons where people still whisper your name. You walk into rooms where men flinch and tip hats too fast. And you like it. Here's a quirky little detail. During one trip, you sit in on a high-stakes poker game in Santa Fe. One of the players is a former Confederate general. Another is a circus owner. You bluff them both out of their boots. Then donate your winnings to a local orphanage because, as you said, it felt like a Tuesday. You carry yourself differently now. A little slower, a little heavier. The limp has grown more pronounced. And the stories have grown more embellished. But who's going to stop you? Every time a paper calls you a legend, you lean back, take a puff of your cigar, and say, they're finally catching up. You begin drafting your own memoirs. Not because you want fame, you already have that, but because you want to beat the lies to the finish line. If they're going to make myths about Bat Masterson, they might as well use your version. And what better way to settle scores than with ink? Still, you're restless. You've outgrown the frontier, and the frontier's outgrown you. Cowboys now ride trains. Saloons are getting replaced by cafes. Your world is folding itself into history books, and you're not ready to be a footnote. So you leave the West behind. You point your boots toward the East. New York City, where the streets don't echo with spurs but with streetcars and ambition. Where no one knows your name, yet. But they will. Because you're Bat Masterson. And this is your next hand. The first thing you notice in New York City isn't the buildings or the noise. It's the suits. Polished, pinstriped, tailored to bones and ambition. Men walk faster here, like they're all chasing the last train out of purgatory. They don't carry guns. They carry ledgers, fountain pens, and names that open doors instead of kicking them down. You walk through Manhattan like a ghost from another timeline. Boots clicking on cobblestones. Your cane tapping a beat that no one else seems to hear. The streets smell like steam, tobacco, and too much perfume. You're not in Kansas anymore. And for once, you're okay with that. You're in your 40s now. Grayer around the temples. The limp is worse, but your wit? Still sharp enough to cut glass. You trade your 6-shooters for typewriters. And just like that, Bat Masterson becomes a sportswriter. It starts small, a few columns in the Morning Telegraph. Mostly about boxing. You write the way you talk, straight, clever, and with just enough sarcasm to make the reader feel like they're sitting beside you with a whiskey in hand. To your surprise, people love it. Maybe they think it's novelty. Gunfighter turned journalist. But the truth? You're good. Damn good. You know what makes a man dangerous. Whether he's holding a revolver or wearing boxing gloves. And more importantly, you know how to tell it. Your columns blend stories, insights, and the occasional tall tale. You talk about the thrill of the ring, the sting of defeat, and the strange poetry in a man swinging at another man until one of them forgets what day it is. Here's a quirky bit of trivia. You once called a fight so slow I started writing my grocery list mid-round. The line got you banned from that venue for 2 weeks, and 4 new subscribers the next day. Historians still argue whether you truly enjoyed boxing or just saw it as a stage where men revealed their souls. Maybe both, but what's certain is that you never write a boring sentence. You can't, not after living the kind of life where each paragraph had gunpowder smudged in the margins. Your popularity grows fast. Fighters want your approval. Promoters want your praise. Readers want your stories. You start getting invitations, fancy dinners, theater boxes, private clubs where the whiskey is older than half the waitstaff. And yet, you still walk like a man who expects trouble around the corner. You keep your cane close. Not just for support, but for what it represents: control, authority, a reminder that you weren't always behind a desk. There's a part of you that misses the dust, the smell of horses, the way the sun hit a pistol's barrel at high noon. But there's another part, a quieter part, that enjoys the hum of the city. The jazz drifting out of windows. The click of heels on pavement. The fact that here, in this metropolis of strangers, you're not the only man with a story to hide. You make friends in high places. And some in even higher ones. One of them is President Theodore Roosevelt. Yes, that Roosevelt. You meet him during a boxing event at Madison Square Garden. He knows who you are before you say a word. Calls you the embodiment of rugged American grit. You call him Teddy, and he laughs like you just insulted his entire cabinet. You hit it off, so much so that, a few months later, he appoints you as Deputy U.S. Marshal for the Southern District of New York. Just like that, the badge is back. Different shape, different rules, but it feels familiar. You don't carry it around much. You don't need to. Most of the time, it just sits in your vest pocket, next to a silver money clip and a folded photo of your brothers, Ed and Jim. Forever young in your memory. Some nights, you write about boxers. Other nights, you write about ghosts. And some nights, you just sit at your desk, watching the city lights flicker like campfires on the edge of civilization. You're not just surviving anymore. You're thriving. But something in your bones knows it can't last forever. Because no matter how many skyscrapers rise or how many headlines you write, you'll always be that man from the plains. The gambler with a limp. The sheriff with a past. The legend with ink-stained fingers and a story still unfolding. New York has a rhythm. And now, somehow, you're part of it. The city that once threatened to swallow you now opens its arms. Or at least tips its hat. You've made yourself useful. After all, your columns fill the margins of the Morning Telegraph like gunpowder in a chamber, tight, volatile, and impossible to ignore. Editors trust your name. Fighters trust your word. And readers? They trust your voice. You sit at your desk most mornings. Fedora tilted low, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Typewriter clacking, cigar smoldering. The scent of cheap ink and burnt tobacco blending into a perfume you now associate with success. You're still telling stories, only now. They pay better and no one bleeds. Mostly. The boxing world is your new Dodge City, and it's just as raw. The prizefighting circuit is riddled with corruption, fixed matches, and men who would kill for 5 more minutes of fame. And here you are, calling it like you see it. You name names. You question decisions. You mock promoters who wear too much cologne and not enough conscience. And your readers love it. Here's a quirky little anecdote. You once wrote that a heavyweight contender's jab had all the force of a butterfly sighing. The boxer showed up at your office the next morning. Angry, shirt unbuttoned, breath like last night's gin. You poured him a coffee, sat him down, and told him that if he hit half as hard as he sulked, he might stand a chance. He left laughing. Historians still argue whether you shaped the sport or simply reported it louder than anyone else. The truth? You brought dignity to it. You turned pugilists into characters, bouts into operas, and knockouts into punctuation marks. But it's not all jabs and jests. You've started noticing how many of your old acquaintances now show up in the obituaries. Some died broke. Some died drunk. A few just disappeared. Like the West itself, buried under concrete and silence. One evening, You stroll through Central Park. Cane tapping against the walkway like an old tune. A child points and whispers to his mother. "That's Bat Masterson." You hear her reply, "The old cowboy?" You tip your hat. You're not offended. Not really. But it lingers. You begin jotting notes for your memoir. Not the tall tales. Not the dramatics. Just the truth, or as close to it as you can get after decades of storytelling. You scribble titles in the margins, from Bison to Broadway. The Last Lawman, ink and iron. You never settle on one. Maybe you don't need to. Maybe the real title's already etched across too many headlines to matter. The columns roll on. You write about Jack Johnson's rise. You dissect training techniques. You mock referees. And somehow, you still make time for the old Western crowd, when they bother to write or visit. One letter arrives from Wyatt Earp. Short, sparse, classic Earp. It reads, "Still standing. Fewer bullets these days. Hope you're the same. W." You pin it to your wall. Another visitor drops by unexpectedly. Doc Holliday's cousin. A doctor now, soft-spoken and wearing glasses too big for his face. He brings an old photograph of the two of you in Dodge, back when your mustache was darker and your eyes hadn't learned how to smile through pain. You stare at the photo for a long time after he leaves. Then, quietly, you begin writing your next column. It's about courage, not the kind in the ring. The kind it takes to remember who you used to be. You're invited to a banquet one fall evening. Journalists, fighters, city officials, everyone dressed to the nines. Everyone eager to shake your hand. The mayor gives a toast. Someone raises a glass to Bat Masterson, the bridge between two Americas. You smile. Because it's true. You lived both. And you never fell off the bridge. You just built it as you walked. It's a strange thing, being known. In Dodge, it meant wary glances and whispered stories. In New York, it means autograph requests, impromptu boxing critiques from strangers on the street, and the occasional young buck who insists on buying you a drink because his father once read your name in a dime novel. But there's something else now. Politics. Not the six-gun kind. The other kind. Slicker. Quieter. But just as cutthroat. You start getting invitations to Tammany Hall events, those smoke-filled, velvet-curtained back rooms where favors are traded like poker chips and truth is something you step around. Not over. At first, you decline. You didn't ride across the frontier to end up rubbing elbows with bureaucrats who can't tell a colt from a corset. But, the money's good. And the city's expensive. So, you say yes. Once. And that's all it takes. Suddenly you're connected. Not in a made man, mafia sort of way. More like a gentleman rogue with City Hall on speed dial. You help push a few candidates. Write a few flattering pieces. Shake hands with aldermen whose suits cost more than your first horse. The old you, the one who wore dust like a badge, watches from the shadows. Bemused. Historians still argue whether you were a willing player in Tammany politics or just rode the wave for survival. Either way, your name starts showing up in new places, society pages, gala invitations, private poker circles where fortunes change hands between sips of brandy. And yet, you never quite lose your edge. At one fundraiser, a particularly smug assemblyman mocks your limp. Loudly, you smile, excuse yourself, and reappear minutes later with a boxing glove signed by the guy who could still drop you in one hit. The crowd laughs. The assemblyman does not. He avoids you ever after. You start dressing sharper. Black bow ties, navy suits, cufflinks shaped like revolver cylinders, just enough flair to remind people who you used to be. And here's a quirky tidbit. You once wrote a fake column under a pseudonym just to mock another journalist's obsession with croquet. You titled it, "Death by Mallet: The Dark Side of Lawn Games." No one traced it back to you. But the editor bought you a drink 2 days later and said, "Finally, someone said it." Still, not everything is high society and clever barbs. You see it in the mirror. The gray, the way your hands hesitate before the typewriter. How you walk a little slower in the morning and smoke a little longer before bed. The city hasn't broken you, it's just softened the edges. You used to walk into rooms expecting a fight. Now you walk in hoping the chair has a cushion. One afternoon, you visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Yes, you. A man who once broke noses over rigged poker games now staring at oil paintings with the quiet reverence of someone trying to understand the world he was never built for. You stop at a sculpture of a dying gladiator. Muscles tensed, eyes wide, defeat frozen in marble. You think, he's beautiful, and doomed, just like the West. And then you move on. You still write, still work, but there are days, more than you'd admit, where you don't pick up the pen. You sit by the window. Watch the carriages pass. Think about 1,000 miles of planes and a million stories you never told. Then you shake it off. There's always another fight to cover. Always another metaphor to wrangle. Because if there's one thing you've mastered, it's staying relevant, even when the world changes the rules mid-hand. The nights in Manhattan carry a different kind of silence. It's not the kind you knew on the plains, the eerie, stretched out stillness between distant coyote howls. No, this one hums with electricity. Streetcars buzz, steam vents whisper, and jazz drifts through half-open windows like smoke. And yet, at a certain hour, it all fades to a hush that feels like the city itself catching its breath. You've learned to love that hour. You sit by your apartment window. Cane resting beside you, typewriter asleep, the skyline is a jagged silhouette, lit by gas lamps and stars blurred by soot. You're sipping rye, not because it helps you think, though it does, but because it helps you remember. It's during nights like this that the ghosts visit. Not the scary kind, the kind that carry laughter and regret in equal measure. There's Ed, standing tall in a dusty sheriff's coat, saying nothing, just watching. Jim, flashing that cocky smile he never outgrew. Wyatt, tipping his hat once before turning to mist. And then Doc Holliday, of course, leaning in to mutter something that never quite reaches your ears. You chuckle anyway, like you heard it all. They never stay long, but neither do your memories. They rise, flicker, and drift away before the city's next exhale. You've seen so much, and yet it's the quiet moments that haunt you. Not the shootouts, not the poker games, but the silences in between. The pauses when everything felt real. Raw. You still write, but it's different now. Less fire, more reflection. Your recent columns read more like journal entries. If anyone cared to notice. You've begun weaving in stories from the old days, not the famous ones. Not the ones printed in pulp and carved into barroom storytelling, but the small ones. The time you patched a boy's arm with your own shirt after a bar fight got out of hand. The way a saloon girl once taught you to waltz using a broken bottle as a metronome. How you once played harmonica for a prisoner on the night before his hanging. Because you both knew he didn't deserve it, but neither of you could stop it. Those stories are softer, sadder, but they're the ones you remember most. Here's a strange detail not many know. You once stopped an entire column mid-sentence. Just left it there, unfinished. The editor asked if it was a mistake. You told him, nope, just wanted the readers to feel what silence tastes like. He printed it anyway. Historians still argue whether you were getting sentimental in your final years or just cleverer with age. But those who knew you, and there were fewer every year, said your writing hid deeper when it slowed down. Like a slow dance with a gun on the table. Your apartment is modest. A few framed clippings, a battered bookshelf, and one photograph near your writing desk, Buffalo Bill. Doc, Wyatt, and you, smiling, or trying to. You look like you're squinting into the future. Funny thing is, you don't miss the violence. You miss the clarity. Out there, you always knew where you stood. You were either in the saddle or in the dirt. Gun drawn or gun down. Right or wrong, at least by your own compass. But here, everything's grayer, softer, polite lies dressed in silk. And yet, you stay. Because in this new world, your story still matters. You're a connection to something wild and untamed. A living reminder that men used to settle arguments with bullets and live long enough to regret it. And here's the quirky thing. People still ask for your autograph. But now they bring you fountain pens and linen paper. You always oblige, adding a flourish. Maybe even a wink. One boy even brought you a book titled, The Decline of the West. You told him you're not in it, so it must be incomplete. He laughed. You didn't. You walk slower now. The limp has spread to your whole leg. Some days, your hand trembles when you type, and you have to pause between keystrokes. But the words still come. They always have. Because legends don't fade. They adjust. And you? You're still in the game. You're not sure when the applause started to feel hollow. Maybe it was during that vaudeville show in Chicago. When Buffalo Bill invited you to take a bow after reenacting a shootout that never actually happened. You walked on stage to thunderous cheers, bathed in spotlight and nostalgia. But all you could think about was how hot the lamps were and how much your boots hurt. You raised your hat. You smiled. You waved. And inside, you winced. The Wild West had become theater. Rehearsed, marketable, sanitized for the stage. Gone were the blood and dust. Replaced with powder blanks and orchestra stings. You watched a younger actor, hat too wide, gunbelt too clean, play Bat Masterson on stage. He struck a pose you never did. Walked with a limp you never had. Said lines you never spoke. The audience loved it. You clapped politely. Afterward, you told Cody, Buffalo Bill himself, that the kid ought to tilt his hat to the left if he wanted to get it right. Cody winked and said, "Doesn't matter. Bat, they ain't here for accuracy. They're here for feeling." Historians still debate whether you resented these dramatizations or simply accepted them as part of your myth's afterlife. Truth is, you understood the show, but it didn't make it easier to sit through. There's a weird loneliness that comes with being the last of your kind. You start to feel like a souvenir people pass around. A walking memory. A relic with a mustache and a memory full of half-told truths. Still, you go to the shows. Sometimes, you even give lectures. Nothing formal. Just whiskey-soaked fireside chats where you talk about the real West to audiences in starched collars who can't imagine life without streetlights. You tell them about poker games where losing meant bleeding. About horses that died under you in the cold. About friends who didn't live long enough to get old. And you always end with something humorous. Something disarming. Like how you once spent 2 hours hiding in an outhouse during a shootout. Only to emerge with your dignity and your lunch intact. The crowd laughs. And you smile. Here's a quirky little secret. Once, during a lecture, a kid asked you what scared you most. You said, one-ply toilet paper and men who smiled too much. The audience roared. But the real answer? Dying forgotten. That's always been the answer. You keep writing. Always. Your typewriters become your revolver now. You draw with words, fire with wit, land punches with metaphors and charm. You write about boxers mostly. But every now and then, you sneak in a piece about the West. Just a paragraph. Just enough. And you keep hearing from Cody. He sends you letters from the road, handwritten, with doodles in the margins. He asks you to join the tour again. Come ride one more time. He says, the people love you. You consider it. But your body answers before your mind does. The stairs creak more under your boots. Your cane isn't just flair anymore. It's the only thing between you and the floor some days. Your lungs feel tight in the morning. And your fingers? They stiffen like old hinges in winter. You start measuring your days in paragraphs, not hours. And the applause? It comes now in smaller bursts. A letter from a young writer asking for advice. A note from a retired sheriff who says your story gave him peace. An envelope from a child in Topeka. Crayon drawn, with 3 stick figures and a scrawl that reads, "Bat is the coolest." You pin it above your desk. Because some echoes are louder than crowds. You begin declining speaking offers. Politely. You say you're busy. You say deadlines are pressing. But really, you just want silence. Not the grave kind, the thoughtful kind, the kind that lets you reflect without distraction. You think of your brothers, of Ed's blood on your hands, of Jim's jokes echoing across saloons, of Doc's cough, rattling like a dying harmonica, of Wyatt's letters, growing shorter every year. You think of Dodge, and Sweetwater, and the Buffalo Fields, and suddenly, all of it feels like a play you once starred in but now only half remember. But you're still here, still writing, still smiling at the absurdity of it all. Because you didn't ride into the sunset. You caught the last train east. And made damn sure your story didn't end quietly. You never planned to write your own myth. It just happened. A few interviews here, a quote there, a reporter who filled in the blanks with more imagination than fact. And you let it ride. After all, who were you to argue with a little embellishment? But now, the truth taps you on the shoulder more often. It visits you late at night. When the city goes quiet and the radiator hisses like an old friend with secrets. You start thinking about what will be left behind when you're gone. Not just the stories. But the real things. The time you missed your shot and no one knew. The time you spared a man and he came back to save your life. The time you lied on the stand because it was easier than telling the jury how afraid you really were. You begin to write it all down. Not for publication. Not for readers. For yourself. A private document. Titled simply, The Parts They Forgot. It's a mess of pages, half-typed, half-scribbled, full of crossed-out names and second guesses. And it's beautiful, raw, uneven, human, like you. Historians still argue whether your private writings were ever meant to be published. Some say you had an entire autobiography finished and locked away. Others insist you burned it yourself, page by page, laughing as the smoke rose like gunpowder ghosts. Only you know the truth. And you're not telling. One thing you do tell is the story of the man in Trinidad, Colorado, the journalist who tried to bait you into a public feud by publishing a scathing article titled, The Coward of Dodge. You didn't respond in print. You took a train, walked into his office, sat down, and said, "Would you like to rephrase?" He did. Here's a quirky detail. When you returned to New York, you sent him a bottle of bourbon with a note that read, "No hard feelings. Just don't print any more fiction under my name." You start noticing how your name appears in more retrospectives, more nostalgic magazine spreads. Last of the Lawman, the West's most elegant gun. From sheriff to scribe, all flattering, all missing pieces. And now you wonder, should you try to correct the record? Or let the myth win? You think about that a lot while walking home from the Morning Telegraph. The streets are slippery in winter. The air wet with that metallic taste of snow and smoke. You pull your coat tighter, tilt your hat forward, and keep going. Step, tap, step, tap. You're limp, once a mark of toughness, now feels heavier. It's no longer a reminder of a gunfight. It's a warning from your knees that your body's tallying its final debts. But the city still smiles when it sees you. The corner vendors nod. The young boxers tip their caps. The barista in the cafe where you take your afternoon coffee adds 2 sugars without asking. You've been here long enough to leave footprints on the pavement. But you still dream of Kansas. You dream of wide skies and the sound of spurs on wood. You dream of gunpowder and hooves. Of poker chips clicking in dusty hands. Of laughter echoing through swing door saloons. And sometimes, just sometimes, you hear Ed's voice, clear as church bells, calling you back. Those dreams don't scare you anymore. They comfort. Because they remind you of what really happened. And while the world spins faster and forgets names like yours, you've made sure the truth is somewhere, inked, etched, spoken. Somewhere, someone's reading your words. And maybe, just maybe, they'll care enough to ask what's real. Not just the shootouts. Not just the style. But the man. The one who stumbled out of Sweetwater with a hole in his hip and a fire in his chest. Who built himself from scar tissue and stubbornness. Who told stories not just to entertain, but to survive them. And as you lean back in your chair, fingers resting over the keys, you whisper to the empty room, Let them wonder. Your cane taps slower now. Each stride echoes longer between the cracks in the pavement, as if the city is counting your steps, measuring them against time itself. The world's moved on. Bat. You can feel it in the way headlines no longer talk about frontier justice, but bank mergers. Not outlaws, but stock prices. The duels have been replaced with lawsuits. The pistols? Retired, behind glass. And still, somehow, you endure. You're still writing. Every day, even when your fingers protest. The Morning Telegraph keeps your chair warm and your byline bold. You've become something of a novelty, the cowboy columnist. They say with amused respect. But no one edits your copy. No one dares. You've earned that much. Each piece you write now feels more final. More like a signature than a sentence. Your desk is cluttered with old letters, half-empty ink bottles, and the same battered typewriter that's outlasted 3 editors. You've memorized its rhythm. It's slower now, like you, but still honest. And like all your oldest friends. It never asks questions, it just listens. There's a boy who visits the office some mornings, runner for the print room. No older than 15, freckles, nervous around you, but curious, too. He watches you type like he's watching a magician conjure something sacred. One morning, he gathers the courage to ask, "Did you really shoot a man from 50 yards with your left hand?" You don't even look up. Only because I'd misplaced my right. He laughs so hard he nearly drops the mailbag. Later, you hear him retelling the story to the linotype guys. You don't correct him. You let the tale grow legs. That's how legends live on, through exaggeration, laughter, and the refusal to be forgotten. Here's a quirky detail. Every time someone asks you for advice on writing, you tell them, write like you've only got one bullet left, and it has to land. Most think you're being poetic. You're not. You're just practical. The city has changed, but there are still moments, rare and glimmering, where the Wild West slips through. A man shouting in a subway tunnel. A bar fight spilling out onto the street. A crooked card game in the back of a Chinatown tea shop. You still catch those moments. Not to interfere, just to remember. And when people invite you to speak at events, historical societies, museum openings, anniversary dinners, you always decline politely. You've done enough talking. Now you just want to listen to the last echoes of your life, soft, slow, and honest. But sometimes the past still knocks. One day, a package arrives. Inside is a faded revolver. Yours, the one from Dodge, with a note from someone in Kansas. Found it in my grandfather's attic. Figured it belonged in your hands. Not on a wall. You hold it for a long time. It's heavier than you remember. Maybe it's the metal. Maybe it's the years. Maybe it's everything it did, and didn't, prevent. You don't hang it up. You don't polish it. You just wrap it in cloth and tuck it in a drawer. Right next to your unfinished manuscript. And as the sun dips low over the Hudson, you sit by your window and sip something aged and amber. The skyline glows. Your bones ache. And the city hums around you like a lullaby played slightly out of tune. You've lived 1,000 lives in one body. Fought for justice. Survived lies. Chased fame. And outran death more than once. But now? Now you're just Bat. A man with stories. A man who, despite it all, won. You wake one morning and know. Not because of pain, though that's there, creaking through your ribs like a chair leg ready to splinter, but because the air feels still. Not city still. Not coffee brewing. Headlines screaming. Boots on sidewalk busy. No. Still. You move slower. No rush. The cane stays leaned against the dresser longer than usual. Your fingers hover over your shirt buttons. Half dressed. Half lost in thought. There's no appointment today. No deadline. No reason to rise, except for habit. And you've always been stubborn about those. You pour a glass of water. Not whiskey. Not today. You shuffle past the typewriter, stacked with papers and drafts. There's an unfinished piece on the ribbon. A column about a fighter from Brooklyn. A kid with too much speed and not enough caution. You left it mid-sentence. The thing about youth is, you'll never finish it. Because this morning, you reach the window, lower yourself into your chair, and just sit. Your breath eases, your shoulders sag, not from defeat, but release. As if, after decades of dodging bullets, bad hands, and worse headlines, the world has finally said, you can rest now. You stare across the city. It's noisy, unforgiving, alive, but it's yours. You earned every brick of it. Every reader, every critic, every soul who ever asked, weren't you Bat Masterson? Yes, you were. And you still are. The final hours pass softly. The sun warms your face. The clock ticks in gentle rhythm. Somewhere, a typewriter clacks in the next room. Not yours. Another writer. Another story. But not your story. Because yours is done. Historians still argue whether you died at your desk or in your chair by the window. Some say you slumped forward mid-sentence, fingers ink-stained to the end. Others say you smiled at the city once more, closed your eyes, and simply let go. The official report reads, October 25, 1921, died of natural causes, age 67. But you know better. You died with your boots off, your legend intact, and your revolver exactly where it belonged, silent, clean, and wrapped in memory. You left behind pages, hundreds of them, words soaked in grit and charm, truth blurred with myth, the way you liked it. And a few days later, when the city reads the news, they nod, some tip their hats, some mutter, damn shame, and a few, just a few, smile and whisper, hell of a run. And now, as the lights fade in your mind's theater and the applause echoes into stillness, you find yourself drifting not toward an end, but into something gentler. The dust of the plains, once stinging your eyes, now softens into a golden haze. The spurs stop clinking, the poker chips fall silent. Even the wind, always moving, always howling, settles down into a hush. No more gunfights, no more deadlines, just the steady beat of your own heart slowing like the last notes of a long-forgotten song. You lean back, not into a chair, but into memory, into the scent of saddle leather and ink, into the laughter of brothers long gone, into the whisper of Wyatt's boots on a wooden floor, into a world that no longer exists, but always will. In the folds of stories and the pages of old newspapers. There's no fear here, only quiet, the kind you once chased but never caught. Now it finds you, and as your breath steadies, your thoughts scatter like smoke, leaving only warmth behind. The world you lived in moves on. Yes, but not without carrying your name. On signs, in books, in hearts. You are Bat Masterson, the gambler, the sheriff, the writer, the man. Sleep now. The West can handle itself.